Welcome back to Moments That Matter and part 2 of this week's special focus on the developments within Ukraine. Dr. Paul Shotsberger had the privilege of talking with a dear friend of his, Dr. Oleksandr Vasylevskyy, which you'll hear halfway through this episode. As always, thank you for tuning in, and let's pick back up where we left off. One last thing before we jump over to your interview with your dear friend. The last time you and I spoke, we talked about the refugee situation and the increasing numbers of refugees. And I think you said that Poland was almost full, just beyond capacity to be able to house these individuals and families who are fleeing Ukraine. Are there other places that they're able to go? Is there a concerted effort to relocate these individuals from countries other than Poland?
Yeah, Poland for some is just a way station. We have a very good friend who went to Poland first because that was the easiest way out. She was already in Western Ukraine and it just made sense. But now she's with friends in Germany. So for those who have those kinds of contacts, then that's great. But for some, they're just there. And this fellow that I am going to speak with here in just a minute, his family's in Poland, and he's in the United States, and he feels like he needs to stay here because he knows he can get work here. He doesn't know that he can get work in Poland. And the reason, of course, is because of the influx of the people. So right now there's about 3 million people who are outside of the country, and about half of that is Poland. Poland is not a big country. I mean, they just don't have that kind of infrastructure. They're being incredibly hospitable, in kind, and to the Ukrainians. But I mean, there's only so much that they're going to be able to do, and then the EU has to figure a way that these people can go elsewhere and not just be stuck, in that one country. But to answer your question, yes, they can go to. Ukraine has a border with Hungary, with Slovenia, and with Bulgaria and Romania. So actually, there's a lot of countries that border, and so yeah, the other half. Oh, and Moldova. The other half is kind of going off to those other countries. And early on, when Poland was just too blocked, people were taking a day, 24 hours, to be able to get into the country, and even longer. It just seemed to make a lot of sense that you head towards another country. And the ones that I know that did that, it was very easy. And yet you have to understand why they go to Poland, because not only is it accessible, but there's a long history between Poland and Ukraine. When the Soviet Union began and Ukraine was sort of acquired, if you will, as one of the republics, it was only in the east. It wasn't in the west, because there was a Polish kingdom, sort of, that Western Ukraine was under. So they consider themselves to be kind of the same peoples.
Interesting. Yeah.
And the languages are similar. So there's a lot of connections there. And that's why people just flocked to Poland, because they knew probably the reception was going to be better for them. And they were right. They were absolutely right about that. But it's estimated, I think we're going to top out at about 4 million,
Amazing.
Which is 10% of the population being out of the country in a short time. 3 weeks, are you kidding me? So yeah, it's just vast. And I saw an interview they had with the head of the train company in Ukraine, and what they're having to do to get everybody where they need to go now is phenomenal. And you talk about like Zelensky being out on the streets, in Kyiv. The head of the train corporation, he's just moving with his trains because he considers himself to be a target. Like if the trains shut down in that country, now that would be a crisis, because not only are they bringing people out, but they're bringing supplies and moving the army around inside. And it would just be catastrophic to lose that. So it's just, there's so much that this movement of people depends on. I think things are getting settled, and like I said, I don't foresee it continuing at this pace. 1 million a week. I just don't foresee that. I think we're getting to the point where the people who are outside are going to stay outside, the people who are inside are going to stay inside, and they've just simply decided, I'm going to stay and fight for my country.
One thing that has been interesting to watch is, will Poland send planes via the U.S. to Ukraine, or to what point can other nations supply them with weapons before Russia considers this an act of war against them? And it seems like Putin has been growing increasingly bombastic in his word use as to what constitutes an act of war. Do you think that that's going to continue to be an issue as far as Putin looking to really clamp down on these other countries assisting Ukraine, whether it be with aid or with military equipment?
I think that he might look for an excuse to expand the fighting and the incursion. So we don't want to give him an excuse. But the truth is, we've been supplying lethal weapons. Not just defensive weapons, but lethal weapons, anti-tank, anti-air missiles for months and years. And these aircraft that are such a big concern are just larger versions of what we've already been sending over. The thing is that it could be construed as being part of establishing a no-fly zone. That's why the planes are frozen. And the other thing is that Poland wants to send these planes to Germany, to a U.S. base, and Germany doesn't want them, and the U.S. doesn't want them. So, if they're going to do something, they'd have to almost send them in on a train or something like that, like a flatbed train. So, or just roll them across the border. I don't know what, but anyway, I think Poland kind of overpromised a bit and overspoke just a little bit, not really understanding how skittish everybody else was about doing this. But you can imagine 100 different things that would cause us to release those airplanes. That Russia might do. They're just going like I said, like a chemical attack or something like that. Okay, that's it. Game over, and we're sending the aircraft over. So this thing could escalate in a hurry. And if, as I said earlier, if Putin sees that he's going down, he's going to take everybody with him. He's not going to go quietly. So there may be a coup, and there may be, a change of leadership or something like that. But before that happens, it's going to be like, remember Putin, and, who knows what he would do in that case.
Well, with that, why don't we jump into your interview just this last Sunday, only days ago, and get some great information from one of your dear friends. Thanks once again for sharing with us. We're going to jump into that interview now. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back to Moments That Matter. This is Paul Shotsberger, and our guest today is Dr. Oleksandr Vasylevskyy, also known as Sasha. Sasha is Ukrainian, and we've known each other for about 20 years. I first met Sasha when my wife and I were on our very first trip to Ukraine, trying to decide whether we could imagine ourselves there as missionaries. We spent 7 years in that country, and during most of that time, I was director of the Institute for the Development of Christian Leadership, a network of Bible schools located in Ukraine, Russia, and Moldova. When we first arrived in Ukraine, Sasha was an instructor for the Institute, traveling from city to city, teaching in Bible schools that were housed in local churches. We figured out that in just 1 year, Sasha had traveled the equivalent by train of a one-way trip to the moon, about 250,000 miles. Over our time in Ukraine, Sasha became an integral leader in the Institute, getting his master's in theological studies and then his doctorate in ministry. Today, March 13th, Sasha is in the United States, and I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce him to you and ask for his unique perspective on the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Welcome to Moments That Matter, Sasha.
Thank you, Paul. Greetings for all listeners. It's a privilege to be here.
And we're very happy to have you. There are many things that we could talk about, but perhaps the most interesting thing to our listeners is what's happening right now in Ukraine. The conflict in Ukraine began when Russia invaded on February 24th, but there had been warning signs before as Russian forces amassed on the border. What were the days like before the invasion? Did Ukrainians believe that Russia would invade Ukraine?
You see, I think it's a little bit wrong to name this conflict. It's a war. And this war started 8 years before, when Russia occupied Crimea, also Donetsk and Lugansk region. It was really a terrible time, but it really was a local. And many people try to understand what will happen later, or probably will some reunited in this region back to Ukraine. It's a different way how it can be in past, but not right now, because right now we see what plan was much greater, much bigger than it looks in 2014. Vladimir Putin many years ago said what his greatest dream was rebuild Soviet Union. It means all countries was like Soviet Republic must back to Russia. Mm-hmm. Probably they don't understand what times changes so much and people changes so much. Mm-hmm. People start to look around the world what way they can live, and Russian style is not good for many of them. I traveled in Russia a lot, from Moscow to far eastern of Russia, many thousands of miles. I was in central Russia, in Yakutia, in Far East, in the places closer to Asian Republic, a lot of places. We, before War Institute, what I represent right now, have more than 15 branches in Russian Federation. Mm-hmm. It's open many church doors. We have many friends in Russian Federation, many churches who are working with Ukrainian teachers together.
So when the war started, where were you?
2 days before war began, I flew to U.S. on the pastor conference in Orlando, Florida. We have a good friend in the city and good pastor conference. We have 1 day for rest, and when we wake up, day after flight, we heard war began.
Mm. And how is your family? Are they still in Ukraine?
My family stay in Ukraine 5 days after war began. But right now they going to Poland and looking for some peaceful place than Ukraine right now.
Does it seem like most people you know have stayed in Ukraine, or have they left the country?
It's a difficult question because we must understand right now more than 2.5 million women and children go to Europe, Moldova, Poland, Germany, Hungary, Romania, in other countries looking for shelters. And mostly men stay in Ukraine and they try to save our country in this war.
And what are you hearing from those who have stayed, especially in your hometown in Rivne?
Rivne, in the western part of Ukraine, is more quiet than eastern right now. But right now it's a really terrible picture. Thousand and thousand people for both sides. I mean Ukrainian and Russian soldiers, and many hundreds Ukrainian civil people died.
Mm-hmm.
They was killed. It's a terrible war. It's sometimes it's difficult to understand how it can happen in 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. It's totally crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But it is. Many people lost their lives,
mm-hmm.
but much more people lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's houses, there's
mm-hmm.
cars, there's business. Russian Federation totally destroyed many factories, many culture centers.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrible.
Do you think Russia will continue fighting into the West, or do you think they will stay in the East and the South?
For many people, better to stop war right now.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like Putin never stopped
Mm-hmm.
himself. He has a plan. Rebuild Soviet Union and rebuild Soviet protectorate on Eastern Europe countries like Poland, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Slovenia, and in others. Also, when we talking about Soviet Union republics, we must to understand Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia. It was part of Soviet
mm-hmm.
Union, and right now they don't want to back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is no plan to return right now. What do you consider to be the greatest need right now in Ukraine? How can our listeners help if they want to?
First of all, we understand only God can stop it. And right now Ukraine really need strong prayer mm-hmm. for Ukraine, for the situation in Ukraine, for people in Ukraine. It's must helpful thing what I can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But right now we need also different way of supporting Ukraine. Many people in Ukraine need food. Some people need warm clothes because many places in Ukraine is cold now. It's probably 30 degrees only. It's a cold.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we need to show for Russian people truth. If you have some friends or somebody in Russian, please send them truth. What really happened in Ukraine? Because many Russian people think It's just like civil war, a local conflict. Only some Nazis, Ukraine try to be against Russia. It's not true. But Russian people looking Russian TV and believe in this lie. Also, many Ukrainian people prayed and asking for NATO, for Western countries, like the sky. Today, many lives can be saved when sky will be closed for Russian jets.
Right.
Because especially in the central Ukraine and western Ukraine, missile attack is not sharp, and it's not a reason to use this. But jets can destroy everything.
Right. Can I ask your personal opinion? And it's so hard to know about the future. It's so hard to know what's coming. As we were talking about just before this, do you think, in your personal opinion, that Putin will stop with Ukraine?
No way. Never. He wants to be great. He wants to write his name in history. It's the same picture like what Hitler did in 1938 and after that. And I think if world don't stop Putin can destroy the world. It's my personal opinion.
Yeah. It's very sobering. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sasha. And thank you, dear listeners. We hope you will join us for our next episode of Moments That Matter.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for listening to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives, which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We'll relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the clearness committee moments, those we choose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.